Hello class, in today's lecture we'll be covering the topic strengthening a company's competitive position, strategic moves, timing and scope of operations. This topic builds on the previous lecture. If you can recall, the previous lecture focuses on evaluating and choosing the best generic competitive strategies to employ. The competitive strategies are broad low cost, broad differentiation, focused low cost, focused differentiation and best strategy. Once the competitive strategy has been decided, the next step is to formulate strategies that can complement the generic competitive strategy and, most importantly, the firm's competitive position. Competitive position was covered in lecture 3 in strategic group mapping. Competitive position refers to the value offered by a brand, product or service relative to the offerings of competitors in the market. The competitive position of a company reveals where does a company stand for any two parameters that customers value. For example, in our tutorial case, the competitive position of PF Chang's is to offer high quality and operate in a few US locations. High quality to target the high-end customers and a few US locations to retain the exquisiteness of their brand. Hence, this would be PF Chang's competitive position in the market compared to other competitors in casual dining. In today's lecture, we'll only be focusing on three aspects of strategy: strategic moves, timing, and scope of operations. Strategic moves refer to the defensive and offensive strategies that can be employed by a company. Timing refers to whether a company should become a first mover or follower in the market. Lastly, scope looks into issues such as integration, mergers and acquisition, partnerships, and outsourcing that will expand the coverage of a company's services or products. These are the 6 learning objectives that we are expected to know. Number 1, how and when to deploy offensive or defensive strategic moves. Number 2, when being a first mover, a fast follower, or a late mover is most advantageous. Number 3, the strategic benefits and risks of expanding a firm's horizontal scope through mergers and acquisition. Number 4, the advantages and disadvantages of extending the company's scope of operations via vertical integration. Number 5, the conditions that favor outsourcing certain value chain activities to outside parties. And number 6, how to capture the benefits and minimize the drawbacks of strategic alliances and partnerships. We'll be revisiting these learning objectives at the end of today's lecture. The first objective refers to the strategic moves of a company. The second objective refers to the timing of a company, and the remaining relate to the scope of operations of a company. These are the contents we'll be covering for today's lecture. We'll first look at the ways to perform strategic offenses and defenses. We'll then move on to analyzing the conditions and potentials of a late mover or first mover and whether a company should be a first mover. We'll then focus our attention on the various strategies to adjust the scope of operations, such as horizontal merger and acquisitions, vertical integration, outsourcing, and strategic alliances and partnerships. This figure reiterates the focus of today's lecture: strategic moves, timing, and scope of operations. These are the questions that we will be addressing in today's lecture. Number 1, offensive and defensive competitive actions, whether and when to go on the offensive strategically, whether and when to employ defensive strategies. Number 2, competitive dynamics and the timing of strategic moves, when to undertake strategic moves, first mover, a fast follower, or late mover. Number 3, the scope of operations along the industry's value chain, whether to merge with or acquire another firm, whether to integrate backward or forward into more stages of the industry's value chain, which value chain activities, if any, should be outsourced, whether to enter into strategic alliances or partnership arrangements. We will now focus on strategic offenses, which are a type of strategic move that a company can adopt. There are 4 principles when planning strategic offenses. The first is to focus relentlessly on building competitive advantage and then striving to convert it into sustainable advantage. A competitive advantage requires meeting customers' needs either more effectively or more efficiently than competitors. So what should companies do to build a competitive advantage? If you can recall in lecture 4, competitive advantage is built from a firm's resources and capabilities. A resource or capability can lead to a competitive advantage only when it passes the VRIN test. If it only passes the valuable and rarity test, then it can confer a competitive advantage to a firm. If it passes all 4 tests, then it can confer a sustainable competitive advantage. The second principle is to apply resources where rivals are least able to defend themselves. This means that we should leverage on a firm's strength to attack the weakness of its competitors. For example, a firm that has chosen a low-cost strategy and is very good at reducing costs should focus on competing on cost with another firm that is applying differentiation strategy and has a weakness in reducing cost. The firm should focus on exploiting the competitor's weakness by aggressively reducing its cost to create greater total economic value than its competitors. The third principle is to employ the element of surprise as opposed to doing what rivals expect and are prepared for. Unexpected strategic moves such as acquiring a company to build greater efficiency or launching a new service route will catch competitors unprepared, and they need to take a longer time to mount a response or counter move. The fourth principle is to display a capacity for swift, decisive, and overwhelming actions to overcome rivals. It is important to launch any offensive moves quickly, because the longer it takes, the more likely competitors will know about your offensive move, because they will be gathering competitive intelligence about your company and mount a response or counter move. We'll be skipping this slide. Here are some examples of offensive strategy options. Number 1, offering an equally good or better product at a lower price. Here we are trying to increase the value proposition to customers. Value proposition refers to value minus price. Value proposition can be larger if we can offer an equally good product but charge at a lower price. This will increase the value proposition. Another way is to provide a better product and charge at a lower price. This will also increase value proposition. Number 2, leapfrogging competitors by being first to market with next generation products. For example, tech product companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Samsung are launching new generation products every year to refresh their products. This would raise the value of their products. Similarly, service companies like liner companies can also revise their service routes to better cater to shippers' demands. Number 3, pursuing continuous product innovation to draw sales and market share away from less innovative rivals. This is more relevant for tech companies where there are more rooms for innovation. This does not quite apply to shipping companies. The nature of the service is transporting commodities, which is very simple and generic. There's very little value in innovating the service itself. However, there can be innovation in ship operations, such as in the design of ships, employing cross-docking, or finding cheaper alternatives for ship fuels. Number four, pursuing disruptive product innovations to create new markets. For example, a disruptive innovation would be blockchain. Recently, PIL, PSA, and IBM have signed an MOU to collaborate on blockchain-based supply chain business network innovations. This cuts down on inefficient paperwork and manual tracking processes and leads to greater transparency and more real-time tracking of shipments. Number five, adopting and improving on the good ideas of other companies, rivals or otherwise. One way is to copy the ideas from competitors, but modify and improve on these ideas. Number six, using hit and run or guerrilla marketing techniques to grab market share from complacent or distracted rivals. Guerrilla marketing is an advertisement strategy in which a company uses surprise and or unconventional interactions with the public or customers in order to promote a product or service. It is a form of viral marketing. Number seven, launching a preemptive strike to secure an industry's limited resources or capture a rare opportunity. For example, right now the shipping industry's limited resources would be qualified seafarers. If ship management companies can secure a large pool of seafarers before or during the initial phase of COVID-19, they would be able to do well despite this difficult time. Now that we have examined some offensive strategic options, we shall now look at who should we choose to attack. We should always choose those who are vulnerable, for example, market leaders that are in vulnerable competitive positions. For example, poor economic outlook such as now has the greatest impact on market leaders such as Maersk and MSC. According to recent news, both companies have lost market shares on key trade lanes such as Asia-North Europe trade. This is a result of their massive suspension of services to reduce their cost of operations, leaving opportunities for smaller scale competitors to gain an advantage in the market. Runner-up firms with weaknesses in areas where the challenger is strong. As mentioned earlier, we try to play a company's strength to the weaknesses of its competitors. Struggling enterprises on the verge of going under. This creates opportunities of acquiring a firm or snatching customers from the firm. Customers of the struggling firm will be more willing to switch if they know that the firm is putting itself up for sale or exiting the market. Small local and regional firms with limited capabilities. If you are an international firm, these firms are potential for competition. You might want to enter their market or compete with them. Alternatively, acquire them before they could become a real threat in the market. We will now look at blue ocean strategy, which is a special kind of offensive move. In general, the business universe can be divided into an existing market with boundaries and rules in which rival firms compete for advantage. We call that red ocean. It's red because the market is highly contested. Another market space would be blue ocean, where the industry has not yet taken shape with no rivals and wide open long-term growth and profit potential for a firm that can create demand for new types of products. An example would be Nintendo Wii. Before Wii was launched, PlayStation and Xbox are competing in a crowded and fiercely competitive red ocean, which focuses on hard disk and DVD games. Wii is a blue ocean strategy because it introduces wireless motion control sticks and accommodates more than 2 players at a time, which is more suitable for large social group gathering. Another example would be Uber, that relies on crowdsourcing to provide private passenger transport services. This differs from the traditional taxi services that we have known. We shall now focus on defensive strategies. Opposed to offensive strategies, defensive strategies involve protecting the market position and competitive advantage of a company. In a competitive market, all firms are subject to offensive challenges from rivals. The purpose of defensive strategies are to lower the risk of being attacked weaken the impact of any attack that occurs, and induce challengers to aim their efforts at other rivals. While defensive strategies usually don't enhance a firm's competitive advantage, they can help fortify the firm's competitive position, protect its most valuable resources and capabilities from imitation, and defend whatever competitive advantage it has. Good defensive strategies can help protect a competitive advantage, but remember, they rarely are the basis for creating one. Defensive strategies can take either of two forms: action to block challenges, or actions to signal the likelihood of strong retaliation. We'll now look into each form in detail. Here are some ways to block offenses or avenues that can be taken by challengers. Introduce new features or models to broaden product lines to close off gaps and vacant niches. This strategy is about trying to diversify to spread eggs around by covering more market segments. It is true that diversifying might cause a company to lose focus, but this would keep competitors in check, ensuring that they will be competing with the company in every segment. Maintain economy pricing to thwart lower price attacks. Companies can consider lowering their price. Consequently, this would create a larger value proposition for customers and give them reasons to continue using a company's products or services. However, the downside of lowering prices would be that the company will be making less profit margins. Discourage buyers from trying competitors' products or brands. This can be done through marketing and during sales interaction. Another way is to create switching costs for customers. For example, giving out loyalty points, warranties, discount vouchers for return customers, or entering into service contracts with customers. PSA also offers dedicated terminals for container shipping companies. These terminals offer preferential rates and give priorities to the container shipping companies. This would discourage container shipping companies from choosing competitors. Make early announcements about new products or price changes to induce buyers to postpone switching. This is often the case when mobile phone companies launch a new product. They will make announcement of the launch very early so that customers will postpone switching to another company's products. Offer support and special inducements to current customers to reduce the attractiveness of switching. For example, telco companies would often give out cash discounts when we recontract with them. This would discourage current customers from switching. Challenge quality and safety of competitors' products. If you can refer to Kanu's model covered in Quality Management in Shipping, the attributes of a product and service can be classified into must be, attractive, indifferent, and one-dimensional. Among these attributes, must-be attributes should be the priority of a company because they would cause great dissatisfaction to customers if absent. Safety is a must-be attribute in most products and services, including shipping. If the safety performance of a company is challenged or is in doubt, it is going to affect its reputation badly. Grant discounts or better terms to intermediaries who handle the firm's product line exclusively. For example, shipping companies can strike a deal with freight forwarders to use their services exclusively. The second defensive move is to signal challengers that retaliation is likely. The goal of signaling challengers that strong retaliation is likely in the event of an attack is either to dissuade challengers from attacking at all or to divert them to less threatening options. To be an effective defensive strategy, signaling needs to be accompanied by credible commitment to follow through. Here are some ways to signal possible retaliation. Publicly announcing its commitment to maintaining the firm's present market share, publicly committing to a policy of matching competitors' terms or prices, maintaining a war chest of cash and marketable securities, making a strong counter-response to the moves of weaker rivals to enhance its tough defender image. We have completed the first part of our lecture, which is about strategic moves that can be taken by a company. We will now look at the timing of a company's strategic moves. Previously, we have looked at what moves to make, for example, going on the offense or defense, but what's equally important is when to make a strategic move. In this part of the lecture, we'll ask the question of whether we should be a first mover or late mover in the market. In businesses, we often hear that we should make the first move to have a first mover advantage over rivals, but in reality, moving first does not always guarantee success or competitive advantage. Some conditions must be fulfilled, which we'll be discussing in the next slide. Consequently, the risks of moving first to stake out a monopoly position versus being a fast follower or even a late mover must be carefully weighed. As mentioned earlier, being first in the market does not always guarantee success. Sometimes observing what the leader does, and if the leader is successful, following their moves could lead to better outcomes. Here are some conditions that justifies being a first mover rather than a late mover. When pioneering helps build a firm's reputation and creates strong brand loyalty, this means that launching a new product or service can cause customers to remain loyal to the company and will continue using the company's products or services. Most consumers are habitual individuals. If they feel that the product or service is good, they will less likely switch to other brands. Another condition that favors first mover is when customers will thereafter face significant switching costs. For example, if you have purchased an Xbox, you will less likely switch to PlayStation because you would have purchased a lot of games that can only be played on Xbox. This creates high switching costs. Similarly, if you have purchased an iPhone, you will less likely switch to an Android phone because you would have purchased a lot of applications, and switching to an Android phone will create portability issues such as your contact numbers and photos. Another condition is when property rights protection thwart rapid imitation of the initial move. For example, if we are first to develop and patent the COVID-19 vaccine, we may hold exclusive rights to distribute and sell it. In that case, it makes sense for us to be the first mover. Another condition is when an early lead enables movement down the learning curve ahead of rivals. This means that the first breakthrough or launch of a product or service will make it easier for a company to obtain a second breakthrough or launch second generation products or services. When a first mover can set the industry's technical standards. For example, when Microsoft launches their Office package, they set the industry standards for all documents, readers, and converters. For example, Adobe will need to build on Microsoft technology to produce PDF documents. Google's online viewer will also need to rely on Microsoft's technology. Lastly, when strong network effects compel increasingly more consumers to choose the first mover's product or service. Remember the case of Xbox and PlayStation that I've covered in my previous lecture? For example, the more people or friends playing Xbox, it will attract more customers to buy Xbox rather than PlayStation because they can enjoy more from online gaming. The same for social media like YouTube and Facebook. The more users are there, the more people will choose their service over other alternatives. These are the conditions that favor late mover instead of first mover. These conditions are basically the opposite of the points that we have covered in the previous slide. I will go over them quickly. For example, when pioneering is more costly than imitating and offers negligible experience or learning curve benefits. When the products of an innovator are somewhat primitive and do not live up to buyer expectations. When rapid market evolution allows fast followers to leapfrog first mover products with more attractive next version products. When market uncertainties make it difficult to ascertain what will eventually succeed. When customer loyalty is low and first mover skills, know-how and actions are easily copied or surpassed. When the first mover must make a risky investment in complementary assets or infrastructure, and these are available at low cost or risk by followers. Here are the key questions that can help a company decide whether they want to be a first mover in the market. Does market trade-off depend on complementary products or services that currently are not available? For example, to launch autonomous vehicles or ships, we will need 5G services to complement the vehicles or ships. If 5G services are not ready, there's no point being the first mover. Is new infrastructure required before buyer demand can surge? Using the same example, to launch autonomous ships, we need automated port infrastructure that can communicate with the ships. If such infrastructure is not available, there's also little point of being a first mover. Will buyers need to learn new skills or adopt new behaviors? Sometimes using a product or service is very complex and companies will need to spend a lot of money and effort to train their customers. Therefore, for products or services that have high learning curve, it is better to be a late mover. The late mover can save costs on training the customers and ride on the first mover's efforts. Will buyers encounter high switching costs in moving to the newly introduced product or service? If there is a high switching cost, it makes sense to be a first mover because that will lock customers to the firm. Are there influential competitors in a position to delay or derail the efforts of a first mover? In the event of such situation, it is better to be a late mover by observing how the event roll out before deciding to make a strategic move. We will now look at the last part of today's lecture, which is about the scope of the firm's operation. Scope has many meanings. It can refer to the range of activities that the firm performs internally, the rest outsourced, the breadth of its products and service offerings. For example, are we only offering one type of service or a variety of services? The extent of its geographic market presence and its mix of businesses. For example, SIA, our Singapore Airlines, and most major container lines have international presence, whereas Scoot mainly focuses on Asia. Size of its competitive footprint on its market or industry. Here we are referring to both the horizontal and vertical scope of a company. Let's say a manufacturer owns businesses in raw materials, manufacturing, distribution, and retail. It means that it has a large competitive footprint. One way to expand the scope of a company is by horizontal merger and acquisition. Horizontal means that we are focusing on the same businesses of a company. For example, CMA CGM buying over APL is a horizontal acquisition because both companies are in the same business providing container shipping services. Here are the differences between merger and acquisition. Merger involves combining two or more firms into a single corporate entity that often takes on a new name. For example, recently K-Line, MOL, and NYK have merged to form the one. Acquisition is a combination in which one firm, the acquirer, purchases and absorbs the operation of another firm, the acquired. The objective or purpose of a horizontal M&A is to create a more cost-efficient operation out of the combined companies. By combining, the company will have greater economies of scale and opportunity to reduce staff size. Expand the firm's geographic coverage. As mentioned in tutorial 1, combining liner companies allow firms to expand their geographic coverage, covering more regions and ports. Extend the firm's business into new product or service categories. With more ships, the liner companies may be able to launch new, attractive service routes to capture more market share. Gain quick access to new technologies to other resources and capabilities. For example, CMA CGM might have poor market knowledge about the US. By buying over APL, CMA CGM will instantly acquire such knowledge to improve its market penetration in the US market. Lead the convergence of industries whose boundaries are being blurred by changing technologies and new market opportunities. For example, increasingly we are seeing convergence in some industries such as the newspaper industry with the internet industry. Many traditional newspaper companies are producing online contents. Another example would be 3D printing and construction. Some companies merge or acquire horizontal competitors to prepare for such industrial convergence. However, statistics show that many mergers and acquisitions fail to produce anticipated results. There are two types of issues that lead to failure: strategic and organizational issues. Strategic issues would be related to financial and strategic performance, such as cost savings may prove smaller than expected, or gains in competitive capabilities take longer to realize or never materialize at all. Organizational issues will include cultures, operating systems, and management styles failing to mesh due to resistance to change from organizational members. Key employees at the acquired firm are lost. It normally happens before M&A. Employees will tend to look for other jobs. Managers overseeing integration make mistakes in melding the acquired firm into their own. We'll now look at vertical integration strategies, which could be used to expand the scope of a firm's operations. A vertically integrated firm is one that performs value chain activities along more than one stage of an industry's value chain system. For example, most major container lines today are vertically integrated firms because they have their own freight forwarding arm and port terminal businesses. A company can participate in multiple segments or stages through inorganic growth, such as M&A, or organic growth, which means setting up their own business from scratch in these segments. A vertical integration strategy involves expanding the firm's range backward into its sources of supply or forward towards end users of its products. Therefore, vertical integration comprises backward and forward integration. For example, a manufacturer performing backward integration will aim to expand its businesses to suppliers and raw materials. Forward integration would include distributor, retailer, and customers. What about shipping companies? What are the companies involved in backward and forward integration? We shall discuss these questions in the tutorial. These are the three types of vertical integration strategy. Full integration, where a firm participates in all stages of the vertical activity chain. For example, when a manufacturer is involved in all segments of the chain from raw materials to customers. Partial integration, where a firm builds positions only in selected stages of the vertical chain. For example, a manufacturer that is only involved in raw materials and distribution. Tapered integration, where a firm uses a mix of in-house and outsourced activity in any stage of the vertical chain. Firms are tapered integrated when they are backward or forward integrated but rely on outsiders for a proportion of their suppliers or distribution. For example, a manufacturer might have its own supply business, but at the same time is also relying on third-party suppliers. In that case, it is considered as tapered integration. It represents a useful compromise between desires to control vertical businesses and needs to retain flexibility. Here are some benefits of vertical integration. Number one, add materially, or in other words, significantly to a firm's technological capabilities. The firm will be able to obtain the technology capabilities of the acquired firms quickly as compared to organic growth. It's not only technological capabilities, but in general, resources and capabilities of a firm. Vertical integration can help firms acquire a more comprehensive knowledge of the entire value chain activities from the source to customers. In addition, other valuable resources and capabilities of the acquired firm, such as patents, will transfer to the acquirer upon the merger and acquisition. Strengthen the firm's competitive position. From the supply side, that is backward integration, the firm will have greater control over the cost and quality of the supplies. From the channel distribution or customer side, that is forward integration, the firm will also have greater control on the cost of distribution, marketing, customer service, and pricing of their products. This would strengthen the firm's position of achieving a low cost or differentiation-based competitive position or advantage. And consequently, with a stronger competitive position or advantage, this would lead to higher profitability for the firm. To recap, backward integration involves entry into activities previously performed by suppliers or other enterprises positioned along earlier stages of the industry value chain system. When integrating backwards, a firm will need to ensure that it is achieving same or better scale economies as outside suppliers, low cost based competitive advantage. Otherwise, the firm is better off letting outside suppliers perform the value chain activities. The firm must also be able to match or beat suppliers' production efficiency with no drop off in quality, differentiation based competitive advantage. Otherwise, again, the firm is better off letting outside suppliers to perform the value chain activities. As for the reasons, firms integrate backwards because they want to reduce supplier dominance over a particular material, which increases supplier bargaining power and hence the prices of supplies. Therefore, integrating backwards can reduce the cost of input for the firm. Another reason is for the assurance of the supply and flow of critical inputs. This is for the purpose of enhancing resilience. Some input or supplies might be very crucial for production and hence it is important for a firm to have control over it. In the case of shipping, seafarers are critical input for the production of shipping services. As a result, some shipping companies are investing in maritime schools to ensure a reliable source of seafarers. The last reason is for the protection of proprietary know-how. Firms integrate backward to prevent competitors from knowing about their products' makeup and components. Forward integration involves entry into value chain system activities closer to the end user. Here are some reasons for integrating forward. To lower overall cost by increasing channel activity efficiencies relative to competitors. For example, shipping companies might enter into freight forwarding businesses so that they can have greater control over the pricing of the shipping service or reduce the cost of performing value chain activities in the freight forwarding businesses. To increase bargaining power through control of channel activities. For instance, third-party freight forwarders might be using multiple shipping company services. By integrating forward, the in-house freight forwarder will only be using the shipping company services and hence increasing its bargaining power and control of channel activities. To gain better access to end users, integrating forward allows shipping companies to have direct contact with shippers and better understand their needs. This will allow shipping companies to market its services, strengthen and reinforce brand awareness, and hence contribute to product or service differentiation. There are some potential drawbacks of a vertical integration strategy. Increased business risk due to large capital investment. The vertical integrated firm is now operating in multiple segments of the value chain. It will require a lot more financial resources to perform the value chain activities. From the backward integration perspective, slow acceptance of technological advances or more efficient production methods. This could be the result of being involved in multiple segments of the value chain, causing the firm to lose focus as compared to a firm that is more focused. Less flexibility in accommodating shifting buyer preferences that require non-internally produced parts. New consumer preferences might necessitate the production of a new product with a special component. In that case, the vertically integrated firm will need to manufacture this component rather than obtaining it from outside suppliers. Internal production levels may not reach volumes that create economies of scale. The issue arises when the vertically integrated firm cannot produce enough volumes as compared to outside suppliers. In that case, it is not able to be as cost efficient as the outside suppliers. efficient production of internally produced components and parts hampered by capacity matching problems. The next related issue is that if a vertically integrated firm is to produce parts that match the economies of outside suppliers, which serve many manufacturers, the firm might experience oversupply of the parts used for manufacturing. For example, a vertically integrated firm might need to produce 1,000 components to be as efficient as outside suppliers. However, the firm might only need 300 for its own production. In that case, there is wastage. New or different resources and capabilities requirements. In fact, the key resources and capabilities required for the success of shipping companies might be different from the port or freight forwarding sector. Hence, there are not much synergies to be gained from vertical integration. We'll now look at outsourcing strategies, which is a way to narrow the scope of operations. Outsourcing involves contracting out certain value chain activities that are normally performed in-house to outside vendors. The conditions that favor farming out certain value chain activities to outside parties are listed on this slide. In general, we outsource an activity if it can be performed better or more cheaply by outside specialists, is not crucial to achieving sustainable competitive advantage, improves organizational flexibility and speeds time to market, reduces risk exposure due to new technology or buyer preferences, allows concentration on core businesses, leverages key resources, and is more successful outsourced. For example, many sportswear brands are outsourcing their manufacturing and logistics activities so that they can concentrate on the product design and marketing, which are crucial for achieving competitive advantage. Manufacturing and logistics are outsourced because they can be performed better or cheaper by outside specialists. Also, these specialists are usually more flexible in terms of their ability to adjust production to demand and achieve speed in distributing new products to markets. Also, in the case of technology products like smartphones, whose design and components are constantly changing, it makes sense to outsource manufacturing. This will reduce the risk of producing obsolete parts or products. As a whole, by outsourcing trivial or marginal activities, firms can concentrate on accumulating resources and capabilities that matter. There are some risks or dangers involved when outsourcing value chain activities. Outsourcing should be seen as a strategy to help firms focus and not to hollow out resources and capabilities that the firm needs to be a master of its own destiny. Core activities that are central to success should not be outsourced. Also, having more activities outsourced would translate to loss of direct control. Although firms do not need to perform those outsourced activities anymore, they will need to spend more time monitoring, controlling, and coordinating activities of outside parties by means of contracts and arm's length transactions. Therefore, a balance must be sought on the activities to be outsourced and insourced. Lack of incentives for outside parties to make investments specific to the needs of the outsourcing firm's value chain. This means that outside parties would not be as motivated or driven to improve their activities as compared to if they are being insourced. Another way to expand scope is through strategic alliance and partnerships. These are less restrictive and less permanent arrangements as compared to mergers and acquisitions. Strategic alliance is a form of agreement between two or more separate companies in which they agree to work cooperatively toward some common objective. Alliance is very common in container liner shipping as a way to reduce costs, improve frequency of services, and network coverage. Joint venture is a partnership involving the establishment of an independent corporate entity that the partners own and control jointly, sharing in its revenues and expenses. It is quite common in tramp shipping, primarily to save cost. Many tramp shipping operators are one-ship companies and they do not have the economies of scale. By going into a joint venture which involves pooling of ships, they can reduce cost on ship management. For example, before joint venture, each tramp shipping operator will need to hire a ship manager. After joint venture, they will only need one manager to manage the commercial and technical activities of the pool of ships. This would reduce costs. An alliance becomes strategic as opposed to just a convenient business arrangement when it serves any of the purpose listed in this slide. Facilitates achievement of an important business objective. There must be a purpose or objective to be achieved for entering an alliance. Helps build, sustain, or enhance a core competence or competitive advantage. The alliance must help develop capabilities and help achieve a competitive advantage over rivals. Helps remedy an important resource deficiency or competitive weakness. The alliance must help the parties correct a weakness or gain access to resources or capabilities that cannot be obtained alone. Helps defend against a competitive threat or mitigates a significant risk to a company's business. Increases the bargaining power over suppliers or buyers, helps create important new market opportunities, and speeds development of new technologies or product innovations. The benefits of strategic alliance and partnerships are listed in this slide. Minimize the problems associated with vertical integration, outsourcing, and mergers and acquisition. Strategic alliance is a more flexible arrangement, and companies can exit such arrangement if it didn't work out for them. Are useful in extending the scope of operations via international expansion and diversification strategies. It can be seen as a less costly way than M&A to expand the scope of operations, for example, global shipping network coverage. Reduce the need to be independent and self-sufficient when strengthening the firm's competitive position. The partners can pool their resources and compete as efficiently or effectively as larger companies who have major advantage in economies of scale. Offer greater flexibility should a firm's resource requirements or goals change over time. As mentioned, there's more flexibility and alliances can be adjusted or rearranged to changing goals. Are useful when industries are experiencing high velocity technological advances simultaneously. Alliances allow companies to pool their R&D capabilities to develop innovative products or services and solutions. We'll skip this slide as it is a repeat of the previous. These are some considerations when forming an alliance. Being sensitive to cultural differences. Normally, we want to select partners who have similar culture. For example, the One Alliance is made up of all Japanese shipping companies. Recognizing that the alliance must benefit both sides. For an alliance to work, there must be mutual benefits for all members. Picking a good partner, the partner should have the resources and capabilities that a firm needs. Ensuring both parties keep their commitments, they must be committed to the cause or purpose of the alliance. It shouldn't be only a commitment made by the top management, but also from the employees. Adjusting the agreement over time to fit new circumstances, the agreement must be reviewed regularly and adjusted with the changing conditions. Structuring the decision-making process for swift actions. Here we are referring to the organization chart where decisions are made for an alliances should be flat and pragmatic, less bureaucratic to facilitate quick decisions. Studies show that alliances are more likely to be long-lasting when, number one, they involve collaboration with partners that do not compete directly, such as suppliers or distribution allies. A trusting relationship has been established, and both parties conclude that continued collaboration is in their mutual interest, perhaps because new opportunities for learning are emerging. Here are the potential drawbacks of strategic alliance. Culture clash and integration problems due to different management styles and business practices. Because the firms in an alliance are still operating as independent entities, there might be conflicts arising from cultures, different management styles and practices. Anticipated gains not materializing due to an overly optimistic view of the potential for synergies or the unseen poor fit of partners, resources and capabilities. This would be primarily due to poor selection of partners which employ different generic competitive strategies and possess conflicting resources that do not synergize with the company. Risk of becoming dependent on partners firms for essential expertise and capabilities. A firm might become too dependent on the other partner and is not seeking to improve its own resources and capabilities. Protection of proprietary technologies, knowledge bases, or trade secrets from partners who are rivals. This is usually a contributory reason for failures in alliances because none is willing to commit and share information about their own operations. We'll be skipping this slide. To recap, we have learned strategic moves, timing, and scope of operations. All three of them can be used to strengthen a firm's competitive position. We have learned how and when to deploy offensive or defensive strategic moves. Strategic moves can be offensive and defensive, which serve different purposes. We take offensive moves to gain market shares, build competitive advantage, or create a new market through blue ocean strategy. We take defensive moves to protect ourselves from the offensive moves from rivals. For defensive moves, they can take the form of either actions to block challenges and signal the likelihood of strong retaliation. We have learned when being a first mover, a fast follower, or a late mover is most advantageous. Some conditions to consider include the learning curve of customers and if switching costs are involved when new products or services are introduced. We have also learned the strategic benefits and risks of expanding a firm's horizontal and vertical scope. Some benefits include gaining resources and capabilities of the acquired firm, strengthening competitive position, and boosting firm's profits. Some drawbacks would be increased business risk due to large capital investment, less flexibility, and requirement for new or different resources and capabilities, especially if a firm goes vertical. We have also learned the conditions that favor outsourcing certain value chain activities to outside parties. For example, we should outsource if the activities can be performed better or cheaper by outsiders. The activities are not core and central to the success of a company. Also, if outsourcing the activities will allow us to concentrate on the core business. Finally, we have learned how to capture the benefits and minimize the drawbacks of strategic alliances and partnerships. Alliances and partnerships provide a more flexible arrangements and are less costly options as compared to M&A. The drawbacks can be minimized if collaborating partners do not compete directly in the market, establish a permanent trusting relationship, and continue to collaborate in the parties' mutual interest. We have come to the end of the lecture. You may refer to chapter 6 of the textbook for more information. Goodbye.